Hello everybody and welcome to the Data Platform Summit. My name is Alexandra Ciortea and I'm a program manager in Azure Data looking over heterogeneous migrations. In my day-to-day job, I help customers move from Oracle, DB2, Sybase, MySQL, or even access to Azure SQL. This is what we call heterogeneous migration. It's basically every migration from a relational, non-relational database system to another relational or non-relational database system. Whenever we open the discussion in the heterogeneous space, it's definitely adding more complexity, more time, or sometimes more effort to the migration process. In order to help our customers improve and accelerate the migration rate and also conversion for their schemas and objects, we are building tools and incorporating your feedback in the tools that we are delivering for our customers. Each and every migration path, Oracle to Azure SQL, DB2 to Azure SQL, and so on, would require its own dedicated section. And there are a lot of things to address and discuss for each and every topic. In today's session, we are going to look on one of the big sources of migration, which is Oracle, and see what are the lessons learned and migration drivers that we are looking at, as well as the tools and things we can do to automate this process and also shorten the transition duration. Migration drivers are also very important for customers, and that's why we are going to start with the business case. If you do not have a business case, a strong business case, you cannot start a migration process. And the next step is looking at your targets. So you know you want to leave a certain database system. You have things like cost, maintenance, or even old features that would require an upgrade that are problematic for you. So you are looking at solving all of these problems by migrating to your target. But what should that target be? And why should you choose Azure SQL? In the second part of the presentation, we are going to basically be demo heavy and look at database migration as well as application, assessment, and migration. We do have, I would say, a pretty good list of first-party tool in our belt. So we are going to try to walk you through SQL Server Migration Assistant, as well as Data Access Migration Toolkit. Stay tuned with us and we'll discover how you can automate and accelerate your migration journey. When we talk about the drivers, we have to take in consideration the entire ecosystem. So migration driver is not a single database. Whenever we are looking at moving the data layer, we have to understand dependencies and connections to any middleware or any front end that is using that system. And of course, make sure that during this transition process, we do not get any compatibility issues or we do not break any functionality. So we want to transform the business. We want to accelerate and improve the digital transformation. And that would get us to the first driver, which is cloud-first mindset. Getting ahead means embracing digital transformation and getting to the cloud. Studies actually show that companies that embrace the cloud grow 20% faster than those who don't. And in reality, more than 80% of the organization now adopt cloud-first strategy as part of their digital transformation. So in order to do this, you have to think about the implementation of the process. Everybody is looking at being competitive and get ahead on today's marketplace. IT organizations especially are continuously looking at ways to optimize how they maintain, how they use, how they store the data, and also how that data fuels their operations. Modernizing to the cloud is part of their strategy and can help you achieve two other important things for your business, which is operational efficiency and also business enablement to drive continuous growth. So IT optimization is actually a key to driving an organization digital transformation, and it introduces some new priorities for organization to consider, as eliminate time spent managing applications or managing in place upgrades, free up limited IT resources to drive this transformation, and also migration of the business critical application to the cloud. So that's something that we hear often with our customers, is the cloud first mindset. Of course, another important factor is the cost optimization. Money are important for everybody, especially for organization. We need to understand how we can also present the cost benefit. And Oracle makes it easier for us because they have a long history of expensive licensing and also a lot of policies that would implement a vendor lock-in. Customers are not looking to go for another heterogeneous migration next year or the next 2 years. So we need to avoid locking in. Azure SQL is available on Google Cloud, on Amazon, as well as Azure SQL. So that's a really good benefit, and that's one of the advantages that we can present to our customers. Besides the high license costs, Oracle also has a very high administrative overhead, maintaining the system, upgrading the system, as well as paying the resources to monitor, and the monitoring application itself are not cheap. One of the benefits of cloud is reducing and leveraging part of this administrative overhead. Last but not least, and I would say that's a very important subject, is performance. I get all these benefits, the cost optimization, the modernization, reducing the administrative overhead, but I need to make sure that I can deliver the same performance, if not better than before. There's been a bias on the market for a while. It was stating that Oracle is one of the best in terms of performance, but that has been many years ago. Our database systems have evolved since, and we can deliver the latest and greatest when it comes to performance. As a matter of fact, we've just been through a migration journey with one of our customers who was moving from Exadata to Azure SQL and was able to even achieve a better performance than in his on-premise Oracle machine. And that's just one of these examples. Although Oracle has a huge footprint, or had a huge footprint in the market, that has been reduced a lot in the last years. And customers are moving to other relational database systems as Azure SQL. But when we talk about target, so we know all of these are the factors that drive our migration out of Oracle, but we also need to know where are we going, what is the target that we are looking at. And it's not always easy, as we have different tools and different steps for each and every target. In order to make everybody's life easier, we've built Azure Database Migration Guides focused on your source. So if you come from Oracle, you will have documentation and migration steps as well as print screen for each and every possible target. Postgres, SQL Server, Azure SQL DB Managed Instance, VM, or Synapse Analytics. The same applies for SQL Server, DB2, MySQL, or Sybase. Have a look at the documentation. Let us know if there is something that we can improve, and we would be more than happy to do it. The purpose of these guides is to actually give you very sharp migration path with pre-established steps that would accelerate your transformation. Well, let's say that you've already been through this migration guides, and if you go through the sources, you'll see there's a lot of first-party tools and automation happening when you're targeting Azure SQL. But besides the tools that would enable you to accelerate this movement, what are the benefits of choosing this target? I would say one of the most important are related to productivity and performance. You can experience up to 30% improved throughput and latency, and up to 100 times faster queries and reports with in-memory technology. We've had a lot of customers using in-memory OLTP to dramatically improve the performance in their systems. We've had big customers with hundreds of thousands of transactions per second that were able to improve their response time even by 100%. So they had 100 times faster queries. Another one is the ability to scale transparently and respond to rapid changing resource requirements across all possible or all available service tiers. With hyperscale, we can also support up to 100 terabytes, so even more than actually 100 terabytes plus. In every system, security is very important. So working with sensitive data and protecting it with transparent data encryption and dynamic data masking is definitely one of the key factors driving the choice for Azure SQL. You can also proactively monitor for vulnerabilities and threats if you are using the advanced threat protection. If you want to enable access control, you can also use multi-factor authentication using Azure Active Directory. So there are a lot of features, and we are still adding to that list, that would respond to your security requirements. Another important benefit of migrating to Azure SQL is the intelligent performance, or something that we call built-in intelligence. The feature allows to basically learn unique database patterns and automatically tuned for improved performance. We have features as adaptive query processing, accelerated parallel queries, and of course, intelligent query processing, the umbrella for all of this. There are definitely a lot of things that would help you achieve the performance requirements you are looking for and also deliver even more. So at this point in time, you are looking at your source Oracle, you have the migration drivers, what's going to help you move faster, and you have your source. But this is a process. The migration itself, it is a process, and it takes time. and it can go through several iterations. Each and every phase that I'm going to present can be broken in different pieces, but we will have a high-level overview. The first part is actually discovery and assess. So looking at your current state, am I identifying the right Oracle instances machines to migrate, the right Oracle schemas? How can I automatically discover them? And then how can I assess? In the assessment phase, we are looking at understanding the complexity of your Oracle system and, of course, the most compatible target. In the future, we are looking at adding extra feature to that phase, and even recommend a sizing of your target. So that's something that we are evaluating right now. It's not implemented, but it may be something that we can implement in order to help you build your migration project. Once the assessment is done and you've locked in your target, Azure SQL DB or SQL MI or Synapse, then we are going for the migration phase. The migration phase is actually the conversion of the schemas, the objects, and also the data movement. So I have converted the objects, I have my project, deployed the project, moved all the data, validated that the data is correct, and then, of course, optimize. It is really important to adjust and, where you can, even optimize your queries or your application depending on your target. We have a lot of built-in features, intelligent query processing. We have a lot of things that can automatically adjust in order to give you the best performance. But sometimes you also need to assess on the application side, or assess even on the database indexing strategy or partitioning strategy, in order to make sure that is optimal for your target. This is the high-level migration process, but each and every phase can be broken into multiple pieces, and we can use different tools for that. So if we talk about discovery and assessment, we have included in the database migration guide Oracle inventory scripts. So it's not built in SSMA, in SQL Server Migration Assistant. We currently have it as a standalone inventory collection, but in the future we are planning to improve that experience and streamline the entire process. So have a sort of a integrated set of tools that would deliver everything from discovery to application remediation. So currently, in order to do a first part of the assessment and the discovery, you can use the Oracle inventory script as well as SSMA. SSMA, it's gonna be the tool, SQL Server Migration Assistant is going to be the tool that's gonna project the conversion percentage and any potential issue that you may encounter in the actual conversion. And that would take us to the next phase, which is in the migration, where I'm converting the objects and then moving the schema data and object to your source. In order to move data, you have several options. You can use SQL Server Migration Assistant, you can use integration services, Azure Data Factory, or even third-party tools. The data movement strategy depends on your need. You can have offline data movement, something that can happen without an incremental sync, or online data movement, where after the initial data transfer, you would need to capture the changes and making sure you deliver your changes to your source as well. So we are going to talk a little bit about the options and what each and every tool can do. Moving the databases is not enough. We also have to think about application and how do we remediate the application, how do we optimize, and how do we run or validate the migrated data. So there are certain tools as Data Access Migration Toolkit, which can help you identify the data access APIs and dynamic queries coming from your application. You can even automatically convert them if you want. And SQL Server Migration Assistant, which can help you validate migrating data. So in SSMA, there is a feature called Tester, and we've included that in the migration guide as well, which can help you compare the hashes before and after migration. So I've mentioned SQL Server Migration Assistant. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the tool itself. It's actually a collection of 5 tools with 5 different installers covering Oracle, DB2, Sybase, MySQL, and Access. In terms of supported targets, SQL Server Migration Assistant for Oracle can help you migrate to SQL Server 2012 and above up to the latest version, Azure SQL DB, Azure SQL Managed Instance, Azure SQL VM, as well as Azure SQL Synapse. So all of that is covered within the tool. You can also convert the database objects to compatible objects on SQL Server. So when we talk about Oracle, that's going to be converted into equivalent or close to that in SQL Server. It can help you migrate data, and we have several options for data migration. You can use client-side data migration, you can use server-side data migration, or generate SSIS packages to move your data. And another important feature of the product is validating not only data, so not just doing the hash compare, but you can also validate the executions of stored procedure and functions with different parameters and compare the output in Oracle versus SQL Server. So that would assure you that after migration, executing a function or a stored procedure with the same parameters would give you the same output. How do we work with this tool? So it has these amazing features, but we would need to first be familiar. Oracle to Azure SQL or Oracle SQL Server Migration Assistant for Oracle has sort of all the steps that you would need to follow for any other SSMA tool. So the first part is creating the SSMA project, connecting to your source, connecting to your target, creating an assessment. That's optional. You don't always need to create an assessment. If you are connected to your target, you can directly convert the objects, deploy them into your target, either in Azure SQL or SQL on-prem, migrate the data, and then if you need to update the applications as well as validate the migration data, the migrated data. So not all the steps are mandatory, and I'll also walk you through in the demo. Not all the steps can or should be executed in this order. So there's a little bit of flexibility in that part. The first part is the pre-migration, the assess and convert. And here something that's really useful for our customers and for you as well is the assessment report. So looking at the objects that I currently have on Oracle, I'm going to have an idea about conversion statistics, percentage of conversion, estimated conversion effort, code comparison, between the initial PSSQL and translate it to SQL, as well as a very useful and nice navigation tree. And that's a really important part. If you would like to migrate or actually convert the schema, you can do that from SSMA. The actual migration has two steps. First is publishing the converted schema, and the second one is migrating the data. I would say SSMA is the most used tool in order to complete this process. Do I need to perform assessment before converting the schema and migrating the data? The answer is no. It's something that we recommend to give you an idea about the complexity and issues that you may encounter, but it's definitely not mandatory. I've walked you a little bit through this process using the slides, but now we are going to actually use the tool and visualize all of the migration steps that we've described earlier. The home interface of SQL Server Migration Assistant allows you to create a project. So that would be the first step. The project is actually the container for your entire migration project. So I'm just going to call it Data Summit. And you need to choose a location, and the most important part is your target. And the reason why you need to choose your target is because we are optimizing our conversions or customizing our conversions depending on each and every version that you are looking at, and also based on the features available in that version. So today we are going to look at Azure SQL DB. So I'm going to choose Azure SQL DB as a target. At this moment, it's asking me if I want to save the changes to the other project. I'm going to say no. I had another project open. So right now I have the Data Summit project created. The next step is connecting to my source. So when connecting to Oracle, we have three providers that we support: ODP, Oracle Data Provider for .NET, OLEDB, and ODBC. In the same installation folder as SSMA program files, we ship also the latest version of ODP for .NET. ODP for .NET is a driver that we recommend, as we have seen sometimes issues with OLEDB or ODBC when it comes to data movement, issues as memory leak or poor performance. In terms of authentication, we support three modes: standard mode, TNS name, and connection string mode, where you can basically build your own connection string with all supported parameters by the driver that you are using. The next step is providing a server name and also a server port and a password. So in this case, let's see if I have the right password. I am connecting to my source and is checking the prerequisites. The list of minimal permission is documented in the SQL Server Migration Assistant documentation, and we've tried to optimize and reduce that list as much as possible in order to be able to retrieve the object, but as well as the PLSQL code associated with those objects. The first part is basically choosing the schemas that we want to convert. You can load all user objects, all user schemas, or you can manually filter out the user schema that you would like to convert. You'll see there will be two schemas, system and sys, that are automatically imported because we use this schema in order to retrieve information about some objects. For today's demo, I'm going to go ahead with the HR schema. Whenever I'm locking down the schema that I would like to load, there's a list of queries that's being executed on the Oracle side in order to retrieve those objects, as well as the code associated with those objects. The performance and duration of this retrieval depends on your Oracle system network and as well as Oracle version. A thing that we have noticed is that with the latest version of Oracle, it's a little bit slower to retrieve this information from system DMVs. So that's happening right now. We are also loading the data types, the packages, synonyms, and everything is going to be displayed in a navigation tree in the Oracle Meta Explorer. So this is where you are going to see all the information being loaded from your source. Within your SQL Server Migration Assistant project, you can save this information on the disk and use it later on. So you can share this migration project with somebody else and they can open it on their machine, or you can save it and load it later on. Another option of SSMA is working offline. So once you have retrieved this information and this information was loaded in the tool, you don't have to be connected to Oracle anymore. So that's also one of the great features of SSMA. If we expand the navigation tree, we can see the objects on your source. So I'm looking at the HR schema and I have the tables, and then inside the tables, if you want to drill down, you can even drill down for constraints, or you can look for triggers or indexes or other things associated with that object. For each and every object, we have a series of options that you can choose. So one of them is related to the type mapping. We have a default column type mapping between the source and the target type. If you want, you can customize that, or you can add your own mapping. Another thing that you can do for tables is local variable type mapping. And that's something that you may want to have a look to validate before running your conversions. Besides the table, we also load procedure and functions. And the reason why I'm browsing through this is the fact that we also load the PLSQL code. So this is the initial code on the Oracle source, and after conversion, you'll also see the converted code. The parameters for the store procedure in this case, and also the type mapping. What's new for procedure and functions is the fact that you can also perform arguments type mapping. The type mapping can be customized for each and every object, or you can do it at the parent level, and it's gonna drill down to the children of the parent as well. Other useful things that you have in SSMA can be found in global settings. So here in the logging, you can define your logging level and also the log file path. By setting the logging to debug, you can also retrieve the queries that we are running or executing in order to build all this navigation tree and show the information about Oracle objects. Another important settings is the project settings. And here we have a lot of things related to the conversion. How do we convert count functions to count big calls? Is it yes or no? Leave them as count, or convert count function for count big functions to allow for larger number. So there are a lot of options that you can customize here as well. And there are things which are related to the migration process and how the data migration is going to happen in terms of fire triggers, keep identity, keep nulls, as well as Azure SQL, which is basically a time interval for the heartbeat mechanism. There are a lot of settings that you can look at, as well as the type mappings that I was mentioning earlier, and setting for the GUI as well. Once I am done looking or loading my object, the first step would be, and that's not mandatory, that's optional, is performing an assessment. I can perform the assessment at the object level, at each and every object level, or I can do it at the schema level. So at this point in time, I'm going to do it at the schema level. I'm going to click Create Report, and it's going to create HTML reports for each and every child object and consolidate that in a parent report. With the latest release of SSMA, which is 8.22, we've updated and rebuilt the reporting experience. So we've basically replaced the old tables with new charts, which are really interactive, and it's really easy to understand the conversion percentage as well as the estimated effort for migration. When the assessment is finished, the report is actually, the HTML report is open in the browser. You can also find all these reports stored on the disk within your project location. Inside the actual report, we have the navigation tree with the procedure sequences, all these objects that you have inside your schema. And on the right side, we have the object conversion statistics. So out of the 30 objects which existed in the database, 26 were automatically converted. That would mean 86.7% of the objects were automatically converted. 3 objects had the highest severity as warning, and 1 object had a conversion error. Let me drill down a little bit into error and warnings and the difference between them. Errors are actually things, code, objects that we could not automatically convert. So it's not an issue within the tool. It's just something that we couldn't automatically convert and that you would manually need to look at it. But in order to help you remediate all the issues, we also have a feature called Fix Advisor. So if you have 6 places where you have the same issue that needs to be remediated, the Fix Advisor, which is based on machine learning, is going to pick it up and actually automatically implement the fixes for the occurrences. Warnings are actually messages showing that we have managed to convert, but you may want to have a look. So these are things that we could automatically convert, but make sure you are happy with the result. And in this case, we had the read-only attribute, which is not supported. So we just ignored the read-only attribute. And that brings me to another great feature, which is showing side by side the original PLSQL as well as the converted T-SQL. When it goes to errors, the code, so in this case, for example, target data type was not compatible with identity, or if we look at the HR transaction columns with identity generated by default were not supported, can also be looked based on their code, on their error code in our SSMA documentation. So we try to build this knowledge base in order to help customers get more information on that error and how they can manually convert. We do not cover all error codes, but we aim to improve and enhance that list. In terms of info, we don't have any infos. These are just things that you may want to take into consideration in your conversion as information. Going back to the schema, the first part is the automatic conversion. The second part is manual conversion time. So this is a distribution of the estimated manual effort needed to remediate the error and the warnings if warnings have any time associated with it. And in my case, I have 0 free hours estimated time for remediation, which is really easy to find in the navigation tree as well, because it's basically on the transaction table. So it comes from the tables, and from the tables parent, I'm going to the child who is table transaction 4. And that makes it really easy for me to see it. In terms of warnings, so all the manual conversion time, the blue one, is associated with the table, but I also have a warning on the view with no time associated to it. So if I'm going right now to my view, which is called HREMP details view, I have this warning regarding the read-only attribute, which is not supported, and there is basically no time associated with it because there's nothing that you need to implement. The charts make it really easy to understand and look at all of this. If you would like to drill down a little bit more into the conversion details, you have the details pane where we kept the original tables with the estimated hours and the drill down on category, procedure, view, syntax element, and also error elements, warning elements, info elements, and a little bit more information regarding the granular object that had an issue. So in this case, I had the read-only attribute in my syntax, and I also had a column which raised the error that has to be fixed manually. As I mentioned earlier, these reports are saved on disk, and you can easily reload them or run several assessment reports. Once you are done with the assessment, the next step is to perform the actual conversion. And here the convert schema is grayed out because you would need to convert to your target first in order to do this. So in my case, I am connecting to my Azure SQL DB, and I'm going to load the objects here and build a local database. The information is retrieved from Azure SQL and saved. If you're going to press the Save Project button, saved on disk in the same location with your project file. Control S does not work, so don't try to do Control S, that has no action. The only way to save it is to press the save or use the file save option in SSMA. So right now, in my case, I'm going to convert the schema. The field is not grayed out anymore, so I'm going to perform the schema conversion. I already have all the objects here, so I'm going to overwrite all of them. And let's see if the warnings and the errors match with the fix that I've seen in the assessment report. And I have 2 errors regarding the number data type, which can actually, let me click on the errors, deactivate the warnings. So I have the target data type not compatible with identity, and also columns with generate by default clause are not supported. So those are the 2 errors. And then if I want to look just at the warnings, I can deactivate errors and information and have a better look on the warning messages here on my screen. So conversion from number can cause data loss, and basically it is the same error message but probably for different columns, and you may want to have a look at that. At this point in time, if I'm going to search in my local database, I already have the HR schema being deployed. So that's just locally in my project. Another important feature that you can do is basically adding statements. So If I have a dynamic PLSQL that I would like to convert, I can add that as a statement here, and it will be converted as well. If I have, let's say, 200 files, PLSQL files that I would like to convert, you can run SSMA in command line and automate that conversions. Most of the things that I'm demoing in the interface can also be automated by running SSMA in command line. So right now I'm not going to add any statement. I'm going to look at my HR schema, and here locally I have my tables as well as my procedures. So at this point in time, I'm ready to synchronize with the database, and that is deploying the converted schema and objects into my Azure SQL. Another amazing feature of SSMA is the side-to-side comparison. So I can see that I already have these objects here. So the objects already existed, so I'm just going to overwrite them. There are 28 objects changed locally and 0 changed objects in the database. So nobody changed these objects in my target database. You'll have all this nice statistical information here. And you also have this nice pane where you can say hide equal objects, and you just see the differences. So at this point in time, I'm going to click OK, and it's going to deploy these objects in my Azure SQL DB. Usually this is a pretty fast object process, but it depends also on the number of objects. I have my schema, but I also need to bring the data. So the next natural step here would be to migrate data. I can use migrate data or save as SSIS package and then later on run the package. On the migrate data side, I require a new connection to the source and target as well. So I'm just going to type that password, click connect, type that password again for, of course, my target, click connect, and then SSMA is going to perform a select star, and it's going to count the number of rows before the data movement. At this point in time, there is a table that does not exist in the target, which I didn't translate, which is transaction 4 because I had the error, and I'm going to click continue, and it's going to move the data for the other tables. So that error is something that I expected because I didn't fix the conversion issue for my transaction 4 table, and that has not been converted. The statistics that I can see here are related to the total number of rows and migrated rows. Now, there might be a difference between the total rows and the migrated rows. And the difference is coming from the fact that you may have changes on the data while we are moving it. So if we started the process, let's say half an hour ago, and this would be a production system, there would be rows being inserted or rows being deleted. So if you see a delta between total rows and migrated rows, that's usually the root cause for the difference, data being altered on the source. Another useful information is the duration and also the success rate. If you want, you can save this report or you can close it. Now I can move to Management Studio and I can connect to my HRDB. I can look in my tables and then do a select top on the data that I have in HR countries, and I can see all the data being displayed here. So that is my query, and these are my results. We've seen how you can assess, convert, deploy, and migrate data using SSMA interface. Another option to automate your or accelerate your migration is to run SQL Server Migration Assistant in console in order to automate the conversion and migration for a large number of schema objects or even do parallel schema conversion. You can find the console application within the installation folder of SSMA, and you can invoke it using the UI project or you can invoke it from scratch. Another great feature is the option to perform multiple PLSQL file conversion using SSMA in console line. So if you're going for the interface, you need to add those statements manually. If you want to automate and you have hundreds, thousands of files and folders, you can do that with console line. And another feature of SSMA is also the data validation. We have a video on YouTube on how you can use the SSMA tester to validate your objects and data post-migration. I'm going to include those links in the resources section as well. Data migration is one of the important features, and we, in the previous demo, performed offline data migration. Sometimes customer would require, especially for critical environments, to do an online data migration. So then in this case, the downtime is actually limited to the cutover time. And we would need to implement a CDC mechanism to do that. So offline and online come hand in hand. For the initial data sync, which is the first part, something that we call offline, you can use either SSMA on the client side, as I used on the demo. So data flows through SQL Server Migration Assistant tools. You can use SQL Server Migration Assistant on the server side. That means jobs are being deployed on the Azure SQL or SQL Server, and the data is moved directly from your source to your target, and that's something that we support for SQL on-prem and SQL on VM in Azure. We do not support it for MI or Azure SQL DB. Or you can use integration services. You can generate those packages using SSMA. Data Factory has a data copy activity from Oracle to SQL, Databricks, or if you have large amount of data, use the data box itself. For the incremental data sync, there aren't many options out there. There is the SQL Server Integration Services, which has a CDC component. You would need to set up a buffer in on-prem, so you would need an instance. It can be either in a VM or in on-prem, where you can store the catalog as an intermediate buffer, or you can use the Azure Data Factory integration runtime with the same component, Databricks, or any third-party solutions available on the market. We've covered the data assessment, the database assessment and migration, but that's not enough. We also have to think about application. Data Access Migration Toolkit, it's a Visual Studio Code extension which can help you assess your application source code and identify the data access APIs being used, as well as SQL queries from different files. Although we state that we currently support Azure SQL DB and SQL Server, we also support DB2. So we support 3 dialects: Oracle, SQL, and DB2, as well as Java and C#. We have a full list of files on our documentation. So in order to familiarize with the tool, I'm going to show you how you can access or how it can assess a very simple Java application. This is my sample application. It's pretty simple. It's just using a simple get employee facade that has a data access layer where I'm using basically the JDBC driver to establish a connection to my Oracle database. And then here I'm using that connection. I am running a very simple query that selects from one of the tables. So in my case, I have my extension installed. It's called Data Access Migration Toolkit. You can find it on the marketplace. And the only thing that I need to do is I'll need to run it and analyze the workspace. I can analyze a single file or the entire workspace. You also have a help available with all the commands. And in my case, I'm going to analyze the entire workspace and of course choose the Oracle dialect to search for PLSQL queries. You can also use DB2 or SQL Server as well if your code has those type of sources. So right now I'm going to use Oracle, and I'll have a very nice report that can be saved either as HTML or JSON. It contains a list of all the connection strings that have been found, the line in the code where it has been found, the reference to data access API, for example, prepare statement that may work differently on SQL Server than on Oracle, and also SQL queries. And for SQL queries, we have low confidence, medium confidence, and high confidence based on the keywords that we find that would qualify that as a query. So in order to see the full results, you can also scroll down to the section. You can go directly to the code, and that's pretty nice feature. I can go directly to the line where I have my query. So I have a lot of things that can be automatically done. So in my case, I have the select first name. If I would like to review this report later, I can save it, and here I have two options, either HTML or JSON. So if you want, you can parse it with PowerShell and extract the queries, the PLSQL queries, and later on, why not provide that as input to SSMA in console line and automatically convert those queries. Identifying the data access APIs in dynamic PLSQL query from the application, it's not the end. You also need to update either the connection strings or fix those queries, but perform tests and optimize your workloads are as important as the conversion phase. And once you are done with all of this, the next step would be redirecting your applications and running your environment or running your workloads on Azure SQL, Azure SQL MI, Azure SQL DB, Azure SQL VM, any target that would fit your workloads. In the next step section, I've included some documentation that can be useful. The first one is the database migration guide, where you can find the discovery scripts, you can find all the steps, everything that I mentioned today, print scripts included, SQL Server Migration Assistant for Oracle official documentation with all the parameters explained, download link for SSMA, as well as data access migration toolkit. So this would be, let's say, emergency kit for people who are looking to migrate from Oracle to Azure SQL. It's not always a simple process, but using the first-party tools and third-party tools that we have, you can definitely shorten that duration and accelerate that journey. I tried to cover as much as we could today. We are looking forward to get your feedback and your questions as well. I would like to thank you very much for your time and wish you a great summit and also a great day.